Okay, so today we're going deep on a really, really heavy story.
Yeah.
The Atlanta child murders from 1979 to 1981.
Right.
And over those 2 years,
hmm
at least 28 people were murdered, mostly kids and young adults in Atlanta, Georgia.
It was a really tough time for the city. A lot of fear. I think rightfully so.
Yeah, and as we get into this, you'll see that the answers aren't really clear,
No. Yeah.
and even to this day are still debated.
Yeah. A lot of controversy surrounding the case.
So ultimately, Wayne Williams,
Right.
a 23-year-old local guy, was arrested, tried, and convicted for the murders of 2 adults
Yes.
and got 2 life sentences for that.
Right.
But he was never actually charged in any of the child murders,
That's right.
although law enforcement attributed a lot of the deaths to him.
Yeah. It's one of those things where after he was arrested, the killings did stop,
Right.
but he was only ever convicted of those two.
Exactly. And that's part of the controversy. And then flash forward to 2019, Atlanta's mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, reopened the cases
Interesting.
with the hope that advances in forensic technology could maybe lead to some more convictions. But we're now in May of 2024, and as far as we know,
Yeah.
nothing has really come out of that.
No public announcements. No.
So for this deep dive, we've used 2 sources, mainly.
Okay.
The Wikipedia pages for the Atlanta murders of 1979, 1981,
Okay.
and the Atlanta child murders miniseries.
Makes sense.
And our goal today is to go through the major events,
Okay.
the controversies, the unanswered questions,
Yeah.
and try to piece together this tragic chapter in American history.
It's a good goal.
So let's start with the timeline,
Okay.
because I think to really understand this, you really need to see how this unfolded.
I think so too.
So we're going to walk through some of the key victims
Okay.
and the details of their cases, starting in 1979.
Okay. Sounds
So it seems like Edward Hope Smith
okay.
and Alfred Evans
Mhm.
were really the beginning of this horrible sequence.
Yeah, it seems so.
They disappeared 4 days apart in the summer of 1979.
Right.
Smith was 14 years old, also known as Ketty.
Okay.
Evans was 13, also known as Q.
Mm.
And they were found
Yeah.
on July 28th in a wooded area.
Right. And this is where it starts to get really scary because Smith actually had a gunshot wound
Yeah, a .22 caliber gunshot wound to the back.
to the upper back, which is just awful.
Yeah, I mean, and these 2 young boys
Right.
are believed to be the first victims of the Atlanta child killer.
It's just heartbreaking.
Yeah, just a couple months later, in September of that year,
Mm-hmm.
14-year-old Milton Harvey disappeared while he was running an errand for his mother.
Oh, wow.
He was riding his bike, which was found abandoned a week later.
Okay.
And tragically, his body wasn't found until November,
Oh, no.
and they never really figured out how he died.
That's so sad.
And then the next month, in October, 9-year-old Yusuf Bell
Okay.
was sent to the store for a neighbor. A witness reported seeing him get into a blue car.
Oh, no.
And then his body was found in an abandoned school
Wow.
in early November.
Jeez.
And what's even more disturbing
Yeah.
is that he had been hit over the head,
Oh, God.
strangled,
Yeah.
and they found masking tape on his shorts.
That's just horrifying.
Moving into 1980, we see the first female victim,
Okay.
12-year-old Angel Lanier,
Mm-hmm.
who disappeared in early March.
Okay.
She was last seen at a friend's house watching TV.
Okay.
Her body was found 6 days later in a vacant lot,
Oh, my God.
and she was found with white underwear.
Whoa.
That wasn't even hers, stuffed in her mouth.
That's awful.
And her hands were tied with an electrical cord.
Oh, that's horrible.
And she had been strangled.
Just terrible.
A week after that 11-year-old Jeffrey Mathis went missing,
Mm-hmm.
he was running an errand for his mother.
Okay.
And then there was a report a couple months later that he was seen getting into a blue car with 2 men.
Oh, really?
But his body wasn't found for almost a year, 11 months later.
Jeez.
And by then, they couldn't figure out how he died.
Yeah, of course.
And then in May of 1980, 15-year-old Eric Middlebrooks disappeared.
Right.
He left home in a hurry on his bike after answering a phone call, and he took a hammer with him
A hammer.
to fix his bike, supposedly.
Okay.
And then he was found the next day near his bike,
Okay.
behind a bar,
Oh, wow.
next to a correctional facility.
Interesting.
His pockets were turned out. He had
Yeah.
a few stab wounds,
Okay.
but the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head.
Okay.
But what's interesting here is that just a few weeks before he disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
he had testified against some other juveniles in a robbery case.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Potentially another motive there or a suspect
Right.
or something.
Yeah.
So then what happened?
So in June, 12-year-old Christopher Richardson went missing
Okay.
on his way to a local pool.
Okay.
He was last seen walking toward the rec center. His body wasn't found until the following January,
Oh, wow.
and it was found with the body of another victim, Earl Terrell.
Oh, God.
And he was wearing swim trunks that his family didn't recognize.
Right.
And they never figured out how he died either.
That's awful.
Same month, 7-year-old LaTanya Wilson disappeared from her apartment.
Oh, my God.
A witness reported seeing her being abducted by 2 men.
What?
One of them climbed through the apartment window and grabbed her.
Oh, my God.
Her body was found in October, but it was skeletonized, so they couldn't figure out how she died.
Oh, that's just horrible.
Then the very next day, 10-year-old Aaron Weich disappeared
Jeez.
near a grocery store.
Okay.
And a witness saw him getting into a blue Chevrolet
Oh, really?
with 1 or 2 black men.
Okay.
And the witness's description of the car matched the description of the car that was seen in Jeffrey Mathis's case.
Huh. So maybe a connection there?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Aaron Wich's body was found the next day under a bridge,
Okay.
and they said he died from asphyxiation after breaking his neck in a fall,
Okay.
which is a little suspicious,
Yeah.
if you ask me.
It's hard to say how he would have fallen in a way that would break his neck and cause asphyxiation.
Exactly.
It's possible, but yeah.
So then in July of 1980,
Yeah.
9-year-old Anthony Carter and 10-year-old Earl Terrell
Right.
were found dead.
Sure.
Terrell's body, as we mentioned, was found with Christopher Richardson.
Right. Right.
And Anthony Carter died from multiple stab wounds.
God, it's just awful.
Then in August, 13-year-old Clifford Jones disappeared,
Yeah.
and his body was found the next day behind a dumpster.
Oh, God.
He had been strangled.
It's just relentless.
Yeah, and then in September, 10-year-old Darren Glass went missing,
Mm-hmm.
and his body has never been recovered.
Oh, my God.
So you can imagine what his family has gone through.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
In October, 12-year-old Charles Stevens disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
and his body was found the next day.
Oh, okay.
He had died from asphyxiation,
Okay.
and he had rub marks around his nose and mouth. So this case is pretty important because they
Yeah.
found dog hairs and 2 Caucasian head hairs on his body
Really?
that didn't belong to Charles, and they didn't belong to Wayne Williams either.
Huh. So that kind of throws a wrench in things?
Well, yeah, and then 2 pubic hairs
Oh.
that didn't match Charles or Williams were found on his boxers.
Wow.
But despite that, Charles Stevens' murder was considered a pattern case.
What does that mean, a pattern case?
Basically, it means other murders with similar characteristics,
Okay.
like the victims or how they died.
Right.
And they used those pattern cases in Williams's trial.
Even though he wasn't charged with them.
Right, to suggest that he was responsible.
Okay, I see.
So November 1980, Taney, 9-year-old Aaron Jackson disappeared.
Okay.
His body was found the next day on a riverbank.
Oh, no.
He had been strangled.
God.
Then at the end of November, 16-year-old Patrick Rogers went missing.
Hmm.
He knew several of the other victims,
Oh, really?
and his body was found in the Chattahoochee River a week later. They thought maybe he had been dropped from a bridge.
Jeez.
And then going into 1981, the killings continued.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable.
In January, 14-year-old Luby Geeter disappeared,
Mm.
and his body was found in February.
Right.
He had died from asphyxiation.
Okay.
And he was friends with 15-year-old Terry Pugh, who
Yeah.
also went missing in January.
Gee.
And an anonymous tip led the police to Terry Pugh's body,
Okay.
and he had been strangled.
Shot.
And Terry Pugh actually lived in the same apartment building as Edward Smith,
Oh, wow.
who was killed back in 79.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So maybe a connection there.
Possibly.
Yeah.
In February and March of 81,
Mm-hmm.
6 more bodies were found,
Wow.
and they thought they were connected to the previous homicides.
Okay.
And they also identified the first adult victim,
Okay.
21-year-old Eddie Duncan, who had been strangled. And then in April, 3 more adults were murdered.
Okay.
20-year-old Larry Rogers,
Mm.
28-year-old John Porter, and 21-year-old Jimmy Ray Payne. Okay.
Both Porter and Payne had been in prison for burglary and had recently been released.
Hmm.
And then in May,
Yeah.
the body of 17-year-old William Billy Starr Barrett was found.
Okay.
And a witness said that they had seen a black man standing over the body
Okay.
before driving away in a white over blue Cadillac.
Hmm.
And Barrett had been strangled.
God.
And then the last reported victim in this whole horrible thing
Yeah.
was 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater.
Okay.
He was last seen on May 22nd with Wayne Williams
Right.
at the Rialto Theater.
Hmm.
And his body was found 2 days later downriver from where police had seen Wayne Williams's car.
Wow.
And he had also died from asphyxiation.
God, it's just unbelievable. So it's a really horrible timeline.
It is.
And you can imagine what the city was going through.
I can only imagine, yeah.
So let's talk about how they finally caught a suspect.
Okay.
So the initial investigation was not great.
I mean, that's understandable, though, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a huge case.
Yeah, so many victims over such a long period of time.
Exactly. And they did actually have a task force with over 100 agents on it.
Wow, that's a lot.
But yeah, it was a tough case.
Yeah, makes sense.
The city had curfews.
Oh, really?
And parents were keeping their kids inside.
Yeah, I bet.
It was a scary time.
You can't imagine.
So as the media attention grew,
Yeah?
the FBI predicted that the killer might start dumping bodies in water.
To hide the evidence.
Right.
That makes sense.
So they started watching all the bridges in Atlanta,
Okay.
especially the ones over the Chattahoochee River.
Right.
And then on May 22nd, 1981,
Yeah.
they got a break.
Okay, what happened?
An officer heard a splash under a bridge,
Oh, wow.
and then another officer saw a white station wagon
Okay.
make a U-turn and drive back over the bridge.
Oh, really?
So they stopped the car.
Okay.
And the driver was 23-year-old Wayne Bertram Williams.
Okay.
He told the officers he was a music promoter and freelance photographer.
Okay.
The station wagon belonged to his parents. And he said he was on his way to audition a singer named Cheryl Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
but the police couldn't find any record of her
Oh, really?
or the appointment.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
So what happened next?
Well, 2 days later, the body of Nathaniel Cater,
Okay.
the 27-year-old we talked about earlier,
Right.
was found floating downriver,
Oh, wow.
just a few miles from that bridge.
Oh, geez.
And because the officer had heard that splash,
Right?
the investigators thought that Wayne Williams had killed Nathaniel Cater
Okay.
and dumped his body while they were watching the bridge.
Wow. That's a pretty big assumption, though.
Well, and there's more.
Oh, there is?
So when they stopped Williams,
Yeah.
the officers saw some gloves and a nylon cord in his car.
Ugh.
And the cord looked like the marks on Nathaniel Cater.
And some of the other victims?
Right.
But they didn't take the court as evidence.
No.
Oh, wow. That's a big oversight.
Yeah. They also found out that Williams had been giving out flyers
For what?
in black neighborhoods looking for young people between 11 and 21
Really?
to audition for a singing group
Oh, wow.
called Gemini.
Interesting.
Then they had Williams take a polygraph test,
Okay.
which he failed.
But those aren't admissible in court, right?
Right.
Okay.
So they started finding more and more evidence against Williams.
Like what?
So they found fibers from a carpet
Okay.
in the Williams family home
Okay.
on 2 of the victims.
Oh, wow.
And then they found other fibers from his house, his
Oh.
family's cars,
Uh-huh.
and even hair from his dog
What?
that matched fibers on other victims.
Wow. So it's starting to look bad for him.
Yeah, and then a witness named Robert Henry
Okay.
said he saw Wayne Williams with Nathaniel Cater
Okay.
on the night that he died.
Holding hands.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So with all that evidence, they arrested Williams
Okay.
on June 21st, 1981,
Mm-hmm.
and a grand jury indicted him for the murders of Nathaniel Cater and Jimmy Ray Payne.
Okay.
And his trial started in early 1982. But there was this weird thing that happened before the trial.
What was?
So the news leaked that Williams was a suspect,
Okay.
and FBI agent Johnny Douglas,
Okay.
who had said that the killer was probably a young black man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said that if Williams was the killer,
Yeah.
he was looking pretty good for a good percentage of the killings,
Wow.
basically saying he thought Williams was guilty.
Before the trial even started.
Right.
So what happened?
Well, the FBI wasn't happy about that,
Yeah, I can imagine.
and they sent Agent Douglas a letter of censure.
Oh, wow.
So the trial started in January of 1982,
Okay.
and the jury had 9 women and 3 men,
Yeah.
8 African Americans and 4 Caucasians.
Okay.
And the prosecution's case really focused on the fiber analysis,
Okay.
saying it linked both Jimmy Ray Payne and Nathaniel Cater to Williams.
Right.
And they also brought up the fiber evidence from 12 other murders to show a pattern.
Right. The pattern cases.
Exactly.
So what did the defense say?
Well, there were a lot of problems with the prosecution's case.
Oh, really?
People even said that in other places it would have been a mistrial.
Oh, wow.
Like 2 FBI agents said that based on how rare the fibers were,
Right.
there was no way the victims hadn't come into contact with Williams.
Okay.
But later, a judge said that that testimony shouldn't have been allowed.
Really?
Yeah, he said it was inadmissible.
Interesting.
But anyway, the jury found Williams guilty of both murders after about 11 hours.
Okay.
And he got 2 life sentences.
So that was it.
Well, not really.
What do you mean?
So in 1986,
Yes.
Spin magazine
Okay.
published an article
About what?
about a secret investigation
What?
by the Georgia Bureau of
The
Investigation.
GBI.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this investigation was looking into whether the KKK was involved in the
The
murders.
KKK.
Yeah.
Wow.
The article said that the GBI had found evidence
Okay.
that the Klan might have been involved in Luby Geter's murder.
Really?
Yeah, and maybe even 14 other cases. And they thought that a Klan family outside Atlanta
Right.
wanted to start a race war,
Oh, my God.
and they were trying to get people to join them.
So what kind of evidence did they have?
So there was this guy named Charles T. Sanders,
Okay.
who was a drug dealer and apparently a KKK recruiter.
Okay.
And he told a GBI informant
Yeah.
that he was going to kill Luby Geter
Oh, my God.
weeks before he was killed.
Wow.
And Sanders' brother, Don,
Yeah.
was recorded saying something about looking for another little boy.
Oh, my God. That's chilling.
And Charles Sanders had a scar
Okay.
that matched the description given by someone who saw Luby Geter get into a car with a white man with a scar.
Really?
Yeah. And they also found dog hair on some of the victims
Okay.
that matched the hair from a dog that was connected to Charles Sanders.
Oh.
But the article said that the GBI closed this investigation in 1981,
Really?
and they sealed their findings.
Why would they do that?
That's a good question.
Yeah, what's going on there?
But then in 1985, someone sent Williams's lawyer a transcript
Of
with a conversation between some Klansmen
Go ahead.
talking about Luby Geter's murder.
Wow.
So in 1991,
Mhm.
there was a hearing about Williams's request for a new trial.
Okay.
And he had this big legal team.
Okay.
And both the Atlanta and Georgia investigators said that they didn't know much
Yeah.
about the GBI's KKK investigation.
Right.
But a GBI informant testified that Charles Sanders had admitted to killing Luby Geter
Wow.
while he was wearing a wire.
Oh, my God.
So the doubts about Williams kept going.
Yeah.
In 2004, the DeKalb County police chief
Okay.
reopened 5 of the cases
Okay.
because he didn't think Williams was guilty of all of them.
Mm.
But then they dropped the investigation in 2006.
Really?
Yeah, because they didn't find any new evidence.
Oh, wow.
And even Johnny Douglas, the FBI profiler,
Yeah.
said that he thought Williams committed some of the murders,
Okay.
but not all of them.
Really?
Yeah, and he even hinted that they know who some of the other killers might be. Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, he said, it isn't a single offender and the truth isn't pleasant.
God, that's creepy.
Then in 2007, they did some DNA testing
Okay.
on some of the dog hair
Okay.
that was used as evidence in Williams's trial,
Uh-huh.
and it matched the DNA of Williams's dog.
Really?
Yeah, but it was mitochondrial DNA,
Okay.
which isn't as unique as regular DNA.
Right, because it comes from the mother
Right.
and it's passed down that way.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it was a match, but it wasn't proof.
I see.
And then also in 2007,
Yeah.
the FBI tested 2 human hairs
Okay.
from one of the victims,
Mhm.
and the mitochondrial DNA matched Wayne Williams.
Okay.
So it didn't rule him out.
Right.
But again, it wasn't proof.
Yeah.
But they did say that the DNA sequence was pretty rare,
Okay.
and it would exclude a lot of people.
Interesting.
And then in 2019,
Yeah.
Mayor Bottoms and the police chief said they were going to re-examine the evidence.
Right, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, using new technology.
Yeah. And the mayor said that even if there wasn't any testable evidence left,
Mhm.
they had to try.
For the families.
Right.
It's okay.
Then in 2021,
Yeah.
they found DNA in 2 of the cases.
Okay.
And they sent it to a private lab for testing.
Okay.
And they also sent about 40% of the original DNA evidence to the lab.
So are they done testing?
Well, as of December 2022,
Yes.
and even today in May 2024,
Yeah.
they haven't released any results.
Wow. So they're really keeping it quiet.
Yeah, and throughout all of this, Wayne Williams has always said he's innocent.
Huh. So there's still so much we don't know.
Right.
It's crazy.
So these murders have obviously had a huge impact on Atlanta,
Of course. Yeah.
and they've been covered in the media a lot,
Yeah, I can imagine.
and even in art and music.
Really?
So back in 1980,
Mm-hmm.
2020 did a story on the murders,
Okay.
and it actually pointed out some of the problems with the police investigation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they weren't following up on leads very well.
Huh.
And then in 1981, Martin Amis,
The British writer.
yeah, he wrote an article called The Killings in Atlanta,
Interesting.
and then the Saga of the Swamp Thing,
Okay.
which is a comic book.
Right.
Well, they dedicated a whole issue to the people of Atlanta,
Wow.
and they had this demonized TV host
Okay.
who was killing minority children.
Huh.
And it was all about social inequality and how the murders were ignored at first.
Oh, wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah, and then in 1985, CBS made a mini-series
Okay.
called The Atlanta Child Murders.
I've heard of that.
But a lot of people in Atlanta didn't like it.
Why not?
They said it wasn't accurate,
Oh.
and CBS had to put a disclaimer on it
Right.
saying that some parts were made up.
Huh.
And the New York Times even questioned whether it was responsible.
To make that kind of show.
Right.
Interesting.
Then also in 1985,
Yeah.
James Baldwin
Oh, wow.
published a book,
What was it called?
The Evidence of Things Not Seen.
Hmm.
And it's a nonfiction book
Okay.
about the murders and the trial and race relations in Atlanta and America.
Wow, so it's really a deep dive into the whole situation.
Exactly.
So.
Then in 2000, Showtime made a movie called Who Killed Atlanta's Children?
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2002, Tayari Jones wrote a novel called Leaving Atlanta
Okay.
about fifth graders in Atlanta during the murders.
Oh, wow.
And she actually went to the same elementary school as two of the victims.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
Yeah,
So she had a personal connection to it.
exactly. And then in 2010, CNN did a documentary
Okay.
called The Atlanta Child Murders.
Okay.
And they asked viewers to vote online
On what?
on whether they thought Williams was guilty, innocent, or not proven.
Interesting.
Yeah, and most people said guilty or not proven.
Huh.
And then in 2016, Andre 3000,
From Outkast?
yeah, he rapped about the murders
Oh, really?
in a Travis Scott song called The Ends.
Huh. I didn't know that.
And then in 2018, there was a podcast called Atlanta Monster about the murders.
Interesting.
And then in 2019, the Netflix show Mindhunter had a whole season about the Atlanta investigation.
Yeah.
And they talked about whether it was one killer or the KKK.
Hmm.
And that same year, Investigation Discovery made a 3-part documentary series
Okay.
called The Atlanta Child Murders.
So many documentaries about this case.
Yeah, and then in 2020, HBO made a 5-part documentary
Okay.
called Atlanta's Missing and Murdered: The Lost Children.
Mm-hmm.
And it focused on Wayne Williams's appeals.
Interesting.
So yeah, as you can see, these murders have really stuck with people.
Oh, absolutely.
And they keep making documentaries and shows and movies about it.
It's a story that just won't go away.
So as we finish up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we're left with this feeling of tragedy
Yeah.
and so many unanswered questions.
It's frustrating.
Yeah, Wayne Williams was convicted of 2 murders,
Right.
and the police blamed him for a lot more.
But they never charged him.
Right.
And there's that whole thing with the KKK.
Exactly. And that's never really been resolved.
No.
So it's hard to know what really happened.